When inventories of libraries are not physically accessible, digital resources and databases offer the only insight into, or perhaps just a glance at, historical artifacts. Coming up with an efficient strategy to digitize manuscripts is critically important in researching genres that abound with manuscripts, such as books of hours and prayer books. Given the overwhelming number of extant copies and limited resources, digitalization must be approached strategically to balance the high costs of scanning with specific research benefits. One option is selective scanning of particular liturgical text types, the method we employ at the Berliner Repertorium. As the analysis will demonstrate, this approach offers much more than a mere compromise. The systematic presentation of the texts in question, which remain particularly unexplored due to their secondary character, introduces them as a distinctive genre of medieval vernacular literature and carries crucial theoretical and practical implications for their research. The online database Berliner Repertorium is a collection of Middle High and Low German translations of Latin hymns, sequences, and antiphons. It provides the user with descriptions of the Latin hymns, their German translations, records of the textual witnesses and manuscripts, and presents information in a systematic, searchable way. Links to the digital reproductions direct either to the digital collections of the respective library or to the scans in the local storage of the Repertorium. Our contribution provides an opportunity to reflect methodologically on the scientific decontextualization of texts from their original environment in manuscripts and their cataloging in the database, using the Berliner Repertorium as an example. This contribution will not only offer a descriptive terminological outline of the effects and challenges that come with the need for selective representation of historical artifacts, but also describe the potential of this approach. Based on heuristic conceptual instruments conceived by Lutz Bergemann et al. In their theory of cultural transformation, we view scientific work on the database and digital archiving in general as an act of transformation. The theoretical part is illustrated by a case study of one of the fascinating textual transformations rendered visible thanks to this approach, namely the structural changes that hymns and sequences undergo when translated into the vernacular. In particular, extensive Latin poems can be split into smaller parts, which are then rearranged and assigned to certain hours, reinforcing or even creating a narrative structure and shifting pragmatic emphasis. In what follows, the theory of transformation can neither be comprehensively reconstructed nor its general applicability to medieval cultural transformations evaluated. The theoretical framework presented here should not lead to a simplistic view, but rather serve as a heuristic tool for the terminological approach of one's scientific work. Bergemann et al. Have developed a theoretical framework for cultural transformation, especially in terms of the reception of antiquity. They include methods of reception theory, transfer theory, and discourse analysis corresponding to an interdisciplinary approach. The concept's main premise is that transformation relies on interdependency and thus cannot be seen as a unidirectional process. Transformation is further to be understood as a complex process of change between a sphere of reference and a sphere of reception. By selecting, adopting, or incorporating an element belonging to the reference sphere, the reception sphere is modified, while at the same time the reference sphere itself is constructed. Therefore, such processes create mutually dependent novel configurations in both the reference and the reception culture. This mutual production is referred to programmatically as allelopoiesis, a neologism derived from the Greek allelon and poiesis, which can be translated as mutual production or creation. Allelopoiesis is conceived as reciprocal creative production, but also as creative destruction, as translation, transfer, and reconfiguration of cultural goods. This productive reciprocity of cultural phenomena plays a foundational role for the development of a society's system of knowledge, as well as for cultural and political self-positioning. Transformation posits that an object or phenomenon from the reference sphere is neither static nor an unchangeable entity, but rather altered, newly generated, and even invented by the specific medial conditions accompanying any process of transformation. The concept hereby emphasizes the fact that every historical understanding of a phenomenon is not a simple realistic representation of the past, much rather it develops in the context of a specific perspective and within the parameters of specific theoretical positions and interests. Thus, the representation of any past phenomenon must be understood as a construction from a later perspective. More generally, this addresses the questions of retrospectivity, perspectivity, selectivity, and particularity that attend any historical representation. How can we apply this theory to our own work? The reference sphere as the original environment of the hymn translations can be defined flexibly depending on the perspective. For example, in material terms as a composite manuscript, semantically as the liturgy of the hours, the Holy Mass, a feast, or more generally as a medieval spiritual text. The work on the database is analytical, but also a creative reconfiguration of cultural artifacts. By incorporating a hymn translation as an element of the reference sphere, the database or hymnology in general as the reception sphere is modified. The presentation of our data strongly determines the reception and perception of translations and textual witnesses that are described, and at the same time constructs and alters the reference sphere. The attention of the recipient shifts from the original material and semantical background to the text genre itself. This means that the translation of Middle High German hymns as an independent text genre to a considerable extent is created by its presentation. The act of archival incorporation into our database cannot merely be understood as an instant of adoption or documentation, it must be seen as a constructive act. However, the methodological alienation of hymn translations as autonomous texts can be productive. The removal of textual witnesses from their pragmatic liturgical context open up the possibility of examining hymns as literary artifacts and draws attention to the study of translation strategies. If we accept the premise that transformations are primarily characterized by one of the three basic modes, inclusion, exclusion, or recombination of cultural phenomena, two categories in Bergemann's heuristic typology of transformation appear to be especially appropriate for characterizing the case of transformation described here. Encapsulation is a transformation type in which the object is integrated unchanged as a whole into the reception sphere without being subsumed into it entirely. The practice of detaching individual elements from the original environment and inserting them into new contexts, such as a museum or a scholarly study, where they are perceived as discrete objects, applies to our project and to the history of science in general. Focalization, on the other hand, denotes an act of transformation in which the agent's interest is concentrated on a specific feature or object, while other phenomena concerning the object are neglected, disregarded, or marginalized. Focalization entails a narrowed, but at the same time intensified perspective on the highlighted aspects of the reference object. In our case, the focus on hymn translation draws attention to poetic features and the variety within translations of sacred texts. At the same time, we are not able to go into much detail about the material and liturgical embedding of the texts in our records, not always taking into account the material or pragmatic liturgical context. Summing up, the transformation visible through the database is not only linguistic as the translation into the vernacular, but also from a scientific meta-level, a specific reconfiguration, encapsulation, and focalization of historical artifacts promoting scientific research in the field of vernacular hymn translations.
One of the most striking textual transformations presented in our database, concerns the Middle High German translations of Latin hymns and sequences composed for vernacular books of hours. In what follows, this kind of transformation will be illustrated by one of the multiple translations of the sequence Salve Mater Salvatoris by Adam of St. Victor. The translation in question, Gekreuzes du Mutter unseres Behälters, is the most extensive of all and contains 7 textual witnesses we could attribute to the sequence so far. The texts are integrated in the golden hours of Our Lady, die goldenen Tagzeiten, titled 7 kurzen Tagzeiten von unserer lieben Frau in some manuscripts. No Latin version of these hours could be found until now, which means that they might be an original Middle High German creation. Most of the manuscripts are roughly dated into the last third of the 15th century and come from the Lower Rhine area. Since several of them contain texts from Getedenburg of Gerd Grote, this translation as well might be linked to the Devotion Moderne movement. 2 textual witnesses contained in the manuscripts, Manuscriptum Germanicum Octave 451, as well as Manuscriptum Germanicum Octave 499 in the Berlin State Library, demonstrate a particularly wide range of alterations performed on the original Latin text of the sequence. Here you can see both translations compared to the Latin text on the left, according to the Analecta Hymnica edition. All the additional text not belonging to the translation, such as titles or doxologies, is set in cursive. The most distinct modification of the sequence concern its form and scope. Latin verses are translated in prose, which marks the transition from the sung liturgy into private reading. The translation includes only 12 versicles of the 24 composed by Adam of St. Victor. These 12 versicles are divided into 6 sections containing 2 versicles each and attached to separate hours as hymns. The original order of the versicles is completely reshuffled, which might puzzle the reader at first glance, since the new order doesn't seem to have any compositional logic. Moreover, fragments of other texts unrelated to the poem of Adam of St. Victor are used as hymns for Sexton Vesper in manuscript 451, as well as for Vesper in manuscript 499. Such arrangement and synthesis of these foreign fragments within the same paradigm as the translation of the original versicles invites to view them as one textual entity. We could identify only one of these additional texts so far. The hymn for Vesper in manuscript 451 is in fact strophes 5 and 6 of the sequence Mariae Praeconio Serviat cum Gaudio. For the other 2 fragments, no corresponding Latin text could be found. These comprehensive changes, as we suggest, have an important function as they reshape the text in accordance with the devotional needs of the new lay audience. A closer look reveals that the new order and the way of presentation of the 12 versicles selected from the original sequence create a narrative structure absent in the Latin text. This is confirmed by the rubrics of the hours in manuscript 451, which correlate them with the stations of Mary's life: Nativity of Mary, Annunciation, Nativity of Christ, Adoration, Presentation of Jesus in the Temple, Ascension of Christ, and Ascension of Mary. Indeed, reading the texts of the hymns in this chronological sequence reveals certain parallels with the major events in Mary's life. For instance, the Matins versicles describe Mary as made by the hand of the Sapientiae, which can be read as the announcement of her birth. The Prim versicles greet her as the mother of the unmade Word, Mutter des ungeschaffenen Wortes, which might refer at the greeting of Gabriel, while the terse versicles praise her with a string of fertility metaphors, such as ground not to be plowed, which brought forth fruit. Following this logic, one could see the fragments of other texts used for sex and vesper as complementing the stations of Mary's life for which no parallels could be found in Adam of St. Victor's poem. So, for example, in the Adoration Hymn for Sext in manuscript 451, Mary is referred to as a star of virginity, or Sterne der Jungfranschaft, who is praised among kings, which might allude to the Christmas star as well as to the Magi greeting the mother of Jesus. Such narrativization helps the reader to visualize the biblical scenes and to synchronize them with their daily routine by remembering Mary's life stations every few hours. Following the pragmatic shift from the official liturgy to private devotion, the German translation stresses different aspects of Mary's image than the original text. While the original Latin hymn praises Mary as a virgin mother of Christ and admires the wonder of incarnation, the German translation emphasizes her love and mercy for the sinful humanity and her great power to intercede for us before Christ. So the translation omits half of the versicles describing Mary's virginity and replaces them with the fragments of other texts focused on her role as the protector of humanity. At the same time, these new text fragments organically blend with the translated versicles of Adam of St. Victor's poem, so that the text of the vernacular hours maintains stylistic unity. Just as in the Salve Mater Salvatoris versicles, Mary is greeted with a string of symmetric metaphors. In the original versicles, they are borrowed from the Song of Songs and point at Mary's wonderful virginity and fertility, Hoidmodige Dal, ungeert Land, durch der Bescheidenheit, Rose de Kirschheid, eine Blume van dem Dorne, die keine Dorne inheid an ihr. The metaphors in the supplementary texts, especially the hymns for Vesper, refer to the Song of Songs as well, like Columba de Starkheit, Fontaine de Barmherzigkeit, but describe Mary's mercy and power to heal and protect in the first place. Mary's intercessory role is also emphasized in the doxologies, which, at least in the case of manuscript 451, are almost as long as most of the hymns. Even the rearrangement of the original versicles contributes to the shift. For instance, the hymn for Compline in manuscript 499, which consists of versicles 3 and 4, stresses the intercessory aspect of Marian devotion in multiple ways. Not only does the ending phrase Luther Guld der Müdigkeit, or Goal of Clemency, refer to the title of the Golden Hours, thus presenting the text as an integral work of art, but it also declares once again that clemency is the main quality of Mary believers should be looking for. This brief analysis shows that the Golden Hours of Our Lady is much more than a mere translation of the hymn by Adam of St. Victor. The Latin text undergoes multiple transformations. Half of its versicles are cut out and the rest is reshuffled, while some text fragments as well as meta texts are added. The translation creates a new type of text suited for daily meditation on the biblical events and aiming at reducing the distance between the devout and God. The emphasis of the text is shifted from praising the Virgin Mary and the wonder of incarnation to praising her as the most powerful intercessor and pleading for her mercy. The purpose of this example was to demonstrate the great research potential of vernacular books of hours. The approach of decontextualization and selective representation used by Berliner Repertorium will, as we hope, render this vast and underexplored genre visible and promote its study. Thank you for your attention.